Hey gang, it's your old buddy Platt. Today I'm here to show you how to make homemade port wine. So let's go. Alright, so if you've been a fan of the channel, you know I did a while back, basically most of last year, I did a wine series where I covered all different varietals, wine growing regions, etc. One of the sections of the wine series was fortified wines, wines that have usually brandy or unaged distilled grape spirit added to them to fortify them. Well, one of my favorite fortified wine is port. I really like it, however, and doing the research in that video, I kind of realized, well, hey, that seems something I could possibly make. So I thought in this video we'd give it a try and make homemade port. Technically, since it's not in Portugal, technically wouldn't be port, but we're going to make the homemade equivalent. It's real simple, unlike sherry where they had the Solero system, they did blends, and you had to have a layer of floor on top. Port is fairly straightforward. What port wine is they will take a red wine grape, create a wine out of it, start the fermentation process, but they don't let the fermentation process complete. Partial way through the fermentation process, they come in and add grape spirit, neutral grape spirit, or brandy. And the alcohol from the brandy, even though yeast produce alcohol, too much alcohol will kill yeast. So that brandy added to the wine ends up killing the yeast, stopping fermentation, but because fermentation doesn't complete, you still have a lot of that sugar left over, or a lot of sweetness left over in the wine. So port tends to be thick, more viscosity because of the sugar, and fairly sweet. It's also then aged. Younger ports or ruby ports, older ports or tawny ports, then you have vintage ports, other things. So, but I thought today, like I said, I'd do a simple version of it. Real quick overview of what we're going to do. We're going to take some grape juice with a red grape. We're going to create a wine with it. We're going to start the fermentation process, halt the fermentation process, and then add some store-bought brandy. I added to it. What we need for this is obviously some grape juice. As with, you may have seen some other videos where I've made homemade grape juice or booze where we've added sugar. Some of you out there maybe, what's with the sugar? Oh, it's sugar. The sugar is for the yeast, not necessarily the finished product, even though with port, more of that sugar is going to carry over. Actually, we obviously need some brandy to fortify it. Because there is a lot of sweetness in there, and again, with wines, you want some kind of balance between sweetness and acidity. We're going to add a little acid blend, something you find in a homebrew shop, to give this base wine something that resembles balance. We're going to use, I have a little bit of champagne yeast left over. You can use brewery yeast, even bread yeast if that's all you had, or if you could have access to a good wine yeast, use that. And because, like I said, port does age, we want to get some woody notes on it, whatever. I don't have a giant wine barrel laying around, but what I do have is one of these barrel aging. These screws are in infusion spirals. It's basically an oak spiral that gets toasted, and because the way the spiral's cut is there's so much surface area of the wood that it exposes to, and we will add that to our finished product and let that sit for a while and let this oak spiral add the flavor, give it some of those vanilla woody notes, what have you. Also, we're going to do a hydrometer test because you want to see where, how far the fermentation goes to stop it. We don't want to guesstimate too much, so we're going to do a hydrometer reading. So now that we've got everything together, let's start the process of making our port wine, homemade port wine. Alright, so what I've done to this point is I poured out a little bit of the grape juice because we need the extra headspace, put in a half a cup of sugar. Again, that is for the yeast and not necessarily for the sweetness in our taste, even though some of that sugar will carry over because we're not doing a complete fermentation. And then I also added half a teaspoon of our acid blend, again to kind of bring balance to our base wine. Shook it up to stir everything, make sure all the sugars incorporated, what have you. At this point, I want to do something I don't think I've done in another video, and that's do a hydrometer reading. A hydrometer is a home brewing tool that helps us see how well our solution, beer, wine, whatever, ferments out, and also lets us guess, or figure out what our alcohol level is in whatever we brew. Before you start fermentation, you'll take what's called the original gravity. Then after fermentation, you'll take what's called the finishing gravity. You can go online. There's all kinds of ABV calculators, and it'll help you figure out what your alcohol by volume percentage is. And because we're wanting to stop, we're going to shoot for 5 to 6% alcohol by volume is where we're going to stop this fermentation and add our brandy to it, grape spirit, what have you. So we need to do an original gravity reading, so I thought I'd show you how this gets done. Again, you have a home brewing thermometer or a hydrometer. There are spirit hydrometers out there if you were somewhere where you can distill, or even a lot of brew shops still sell those the spirit hydrometers. So you want to make sure you have a home brewing hydrometer, and you want to fill your little flask here. They sell these at home brew shops too. About 2/3 to 3/4 full. You don't want this thing to sink to the bottom and give you a false reading. You want enough space where it's buoyant enough, but you also want enough head space where you're not spilling. And you give it a spin. Alright, so let's see where we're at. This is giving me a reading of 1.080. Some of the last few beer kits and stuff I've done lately, I think my vanilla milkshake pale ale was like 1.045 or something like that, original gravity. So we got a lot more sugar in this because we added to it. So we've got a higher alcohol, or we could hit a higher alcohol mark if we wanted to let this ferment through. I want to say we probably could get around 10 something alcohol by volume if we did a complete fermentation. This we're going to do in half. But so we know our starting point, 1.080 is our original gravity. We're going to shoot for a point where we get to, I'm going to guesstimate probably 1.045 or 1.04 or something like that. Should get us around the 5% mark. This may take 24 to 36 hours, something like that. So anyway, what we're going to do now is I'm going to write down my gravity. I'll go ahead and pitch the yeast, add my airlock on top. We'll let this go for a day or so, come back and check the gravity. And when we get to that 5 to 6% alcohol by volume, we'll come back. I'll show you me doing the final reading and adding our brandy spirit to that, stopping the fermentation. So let's come back. All right, gang, so it's been about 48 hours, a little over 48 hours. Just did a hydrometer reading, and our original gravity is 1.080. Just checked it. It's now 1.030. That gets us to around 6.5% alcohol by volume, which is kind of what we're shooting for. So the next step is we're going to it's now time to combine with our brandy here. What we're going to do, I did some rough math. We're going to take 16 ounces of our brandy and combine with 20 ounces of our wine, not completely fermented wine. And we're going to put them in a separate container. All I had was either smaller quart ones, or this one's about a gallon. So we're going to use this container. And then I'm going to add in our wood screw in here. So let me go ahead, get this combined. With the two combined, the 20 ounces of wine with the 16 ounces of 80 proof brandy, that's going to get us to roughly 20% alcohol by volume, which is you know, around most ports are 17 to 20, so we're going to be kind of on the high end, but well within normal on ports. So let me get this all together in our container, and then we'll wrap up, and I'll kind of talk you through the rest of the process. All right, so we've added our wine base with 20 ounces of the wine base, which is around 6.5% alcohol by volume, with 16 ounces of our 80 proof brandy. We'll put it in our container, and the last thing we need to do is add our wood screw. Ports are traditionally aged in wooden barrels. They get a little aging, they pick up some of those woody notes, what have you. The younger ports are known as ruby ports, the older ports tawny ports, and then you have vintage ports. We're going to try to make our best version of a ruby port. I'm going to take this wood screw, we're going to add it in here for roughly a little more than 1 quart is what we're producing, and we're going to let this sit for about 1 month. Doing a little reading on the amount of alcohol we got, 1 quart, the size of that screw. 1 month equals to about 1 year in a barrel, and that's because this little screw has a lot of surface area. That's why it's cut into a screw, and because more of this liquid will come in contact with it than necessarily in a big barrel, oddly enough. So we're going to let this go for about a month, and then we should be ready to try. Now, real quick, even though we're adding 80 proof spirit to our wine, and that will stop the yeast from working, that'll end up killing off the yeast, stop it from working, and this will need to be filtered after you're done. Doesn't necessarily kill everything inside, so you want to make sure you'll sanitize your container, because there are some bacteria out there, lactobacillus one of them, that can operate at a higher alcohol level than regular yeast. So be sure to sanitize this before you use it. Also, when the month is done, we'll run it through a coffee filter, what have you, because you will have some dead yeast on the bottom, because remember, we weren't done with fermentation, so there's still yeast floating, so you'll have the yeast fall out. You want to filter that. And here in about 1 month, we'll be ready to go. We will try this on a future homebrew tasting video, see how it worked out. Like I said, we ended up with 1 quart of roughly 20% ABV homemade port wine. Well, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please subscribe down below. Also, please like the videos because it lets YouTube know we're putting out good content. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave them in the comment section, or you can always contact me on the Twitter page. Till next time, bottoms up.